Good morning, everyone. This morning, I'm going to continue on with the reading of Answer to Job, and also with, just a second, I have to get one thing cleared. Okay. Reading of Answer to Job, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Jordan Hoggard, who's my friend in this process, and when he arrives, we'll do that because he has a very interesting business that he is conducting, and it's all about individuation, as if you understand that. And so until Jordan arrives, I'll go ahead and begin. So you recall that last week we were talking again about Answer to Job and the fact that Satan had made a bet with God that he could cause Job to curse God and stop believing in him. And so I want to begin with that aspect, which was in the paragraph that we finished with last week about the doubting thought. Now, so I'm just going to begin in the middle of paragraph 287, since it's a whole page long. But here's what Jung says. This doubting thought is Satan, who, after one other thing I wanted to mention, if you substitute the words Satan for Vladimir Putin and Job for the Ukrainians, you may get a more clear understanding of what Dr. Jung is talking about at the collective level, because now we have a tremendous example of it. But anyway, the doubting thought is Satan, who, after completing his evil handiwork, has returned to the paternal bosom in order to continue his subversive activity there. Yahweh must have seen that Job's loyalty was unshakable and that Satan had lost his bet. He must also have realized that in accepting this bet, he had done everything possible to drive his faithful servant to disloyalty, even to the extent of perpetrating a whole series of crimes. Yet it is not remorse and certainly not moral horror that rises to his consciousness, but an obscure intimation of something that questions his omnipotence. He is particularly sensitive on this point because might is the great argument. But omniscience knows that might excuses nothing. The said intimation refers, of course, to the extremely uncomfortable fact that Yahweh had let himself be bamboozled by Satan. This weakness of his does not reach full consciousness, since Satan is treated with remarkable tolerance and consideration. Evidently, Satan's intrigue is deliberately overlooked at Job's expense. Okay, so that's what I had read to begin with, or to end with last week. And so now we're going to enter into the all the powers of Yahweh. And so this is a very interesting session of this. And of course, I'll answer any questions you have on the YouTube chat. So going on, paragraph 588. Luckily enough, Job had noticed during this harangue that everything else had been mentioned except his right. He has understood that it is at present impossible to argue the question of right, as it is only too obvious that Yahweh has no interest whatever in Job's cause, but is far more preoccupied with his own affairs. Satan, that is to say, has somehow to disappear, and this can best be done by casting suspicion on Job as a man of subversive opinions. The problem is thus switched on to another track, and the episode with Satan remains unmentioned and unconscious. To the spectator, it is not quite clear why Job is treated in this almighty exhibition of thunder and lightning, but the performance as such is sufficiently magnificent and impressive to convince not only a larger audience, but above all, Yahweh himself of his unassailable power. Whether Job realizes what violence Yahweh is doing to his own omniscience by behaving like this, we do not know. But his silence and submission leave a number of possibilities open. Job has no alternative but formally to revoke his demand for justice, and he therefore answers in the words quoted at the beginning, "I lay my hand upon my mouth." Okay, so what we're saying is that Yahweh is not someone that can be reasoned with. It's not a court of justice. This is the way Yahweh is, and he's going to continue on that way no matter what Job does. And it's unfortunate, but that's what he's doing. So carrying on now. He betrays not, paragraph 589. He betrays not the slightest trace of mental reservation. In fact, his answer leaves us in doubt that he has succumbed completely and without question to the tremendous force of the divine demonstration. The most exacting tyrant would have been satisfied with this and would be quite sure that his servant, from terror alone, to say nothing of the undoubted loyalty, would not dare to nourish a single improper thought for a very long time to come. I don't know. That's paragraph 589. Do you think the Ukrainians will just forget about it and put their hand upon their mouth once the Ukraine war is over? I don't know. I'm doubtful on that. Paragraph 590. Strangely enough, Yahweh does not notice anything of the kind. He does not see Job and his situation at all. It is rather as he had another powerful opponent in the place of Job, one who was better worth challenging. This is clear from his twice repeated taunt. "Gird up your loins like a man, I will question you, and you will declare to me." Well, so we can reasonably ask ourselves whether Vladimir Putin is taking any notice of the suffering that he's commenced both in Ukraine and in Russia, because obviously there are many Russian soldiers who are not coming home. And once the Russian people realize that, it's going to be a very sad moment in Russia, as well as it obviously already is in Ukraine. 591. One would have to choose positively grotesque examples to illustrate the disproportion between the two antagonists. Yahweh sees something in Job which he would not ascribe to him, but to God, that is, an equal power, which causes him to bring out his whole power apparatus and parade it before his opponent. Yahweh projects onto Job a skeptic's face, which is hateful to him because it is his own, and which gazes at him with an uncanny and critical eye. He is afraid of it, for only in face of something frightening does one let off a cannonade of references to one's power, cleverness, courage, invincibility, etc. What has all that to do with Job? Is it worth the lion's? It is worth the lion's. Is it worth the lion's while to terrify a mouse? You know, the lion doesn't have to bother to terrify the mouse. He just eats it. And so, why is Yahweh spending all this time with Job? It's because Yahweh is actually within Job. And that's the point. And so Job is actually arguing with parts of himself. And, this is a fundamental teaching of Jungian psychology, that God is within us, not out there in the physical universe. And so there's no point in arguing with that part of ourselves that can kill us one way or another. We just have to appeal. What Job did was he appealed to the good side of God and just ignored the bad side. And so anyway, Yahweh is not very happy about the fact that Job is standing up to him, and always reminds me of my father's dictum that he taught me when I was in the 4th grade, which is every hard-boiled egg is yellow inside. And so Yahweh is a hard-boiled egg in this case, and he's meeting his match just by standing up to him. And it's beginning to look like the West is going to have to do more to stand up to Vladimir Putin. And this morning's cable news information is suggesting that after the horrible things that Russian soldiers did in some of these towns in Ukraine. So I'm going to read on here. Paragraph 592. Yahweh cannot rest satisfied with the first victorious round. Job has long since been knocked out, but the great antagonist whose phantom is projected on the pitiable sufferer still stands menacingly upright. Therefore, Yahweh raises his arm again. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Have you an arm like God? And can you thunder with a voice like this? And that's a quote from Job 48 through 9. And Dr. Jung emphasizes here that in this segment of the book of Job, Yahweh goes for 70 verses talking about all his powers. Now, if you're so all-powerful, why do you have to convince, as he says earlier, why does he have to convince the mouse? Obviously, he has that power. So anyway, 593. man abandoned without protection and stripped of his rights, and whose nothingness is thrown in his face at every opportunity, evidently appears to be so dangerous to Yahweh that he must be battered down with the heaviest artillery. What irritates Yahweh can be seen from his challenge to the ostensible Job. Okay, so obviously Ukraine and Vladimir Zelensky is appearing dangerous to Vladimir Putin right now because he stood up against him, and he's pulled out his heaviest artillery. So let's read what Job says. Look on everyone that is proud and bring him low, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust together, bind their faces in the hidden place. Then will I also acknowledge to you that your own right hand can give you victory. This is Job, I believe, speaking here. And so Job is saying here that even if he batters people down, they still come back. And so paragraph 594, Job is challenged as though he himself were a god. But, okay, so that is Yahweh speaking. So Job, in the beginning of the next paragraph, we learn this, but Yahweh is expressing his power to, it's like the lion talking to the mouse and talking about his power and showing his pride and everything. Look on it. So I'll go back to that again, 593. Look on everyone that is proud and bring him low, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust together, bind their faces in the hidden place. Then will I also acknowledge to you that your own right hand can give you victory. So what Yahweh is saying is, I can do all these things and you can't. And so you're lower than a mouse, right? You can, your hand can give you victory if you can do all these things, but oh, by the way, you can't. Okay, so that's the point. And so 594, Job is challenged as though he himself were a god. But in the contemporary metaphysics, there is no deuteros theos, no other god except Satan, who owns Yahweh's ear and is able to influence him. He is the only one who can pull the wool over his eyes, beguile him, and put him up to a massive violation of his own penal code. A formidable opponent indeed, and because of his close kinship, so compromising that he must be concealed with the utmost discretion, even to the point of God's hiding him from his own consciousness in his own bosom. In his stead, God must set up his miserable servant as the bugbear who he has to fight, in the hope that by banishing the dreaded countenance to the hidden place, he will be able to maintain himself in a state of unconsciousness. So what Jung is saying here is that Yahweh himself wants to be unconscious. And of course, in his discussion about the rivers of animals below Mount Elgon in Memory Streams Reflections, Jung makes the point that that he was the first human being that may have looked out on a site like that and recognized consciously that God, who created these streams of animals, has rather a dim consciousness, because it took hundreds of millions of years to create all those herds. And fine, they're there now, but it took hundreds of millions of years to get there. And so this is not an omniscient God who can say abracadabra, boom, let there be herds of elk, or giraffes and elephants and hippopotami, etc. It took him hundreds of millions of years to do that. And so he's not a very conscious God. Yahweh isn't. Okay, so 595. The stage managing of this imaginary duel, the stage managing of this imaginary duel, the speechifying and the impressive performance given by the prehistoric menagerie would not be sufficiently explained if we tried to reduce them to the purely negative factor of Yahweh's fear of becoming conscious and of the relativization which this entails. The conflict becomes acute for Yahweh as a result of a new factor, which is, however, not hidden from omniscience, though in this case, the existing knowledge is not accompanied by any conclusion. The new factor is something that has never occurred before in the history of the world. The unheard of fact that, without knowing it or wanting it, a mortal man is raised by his moral behavior above the stars in heaven, from which position of advantage he can behold the back of Yahweh, the abysmal world of shards. So the point here, I have a panelist guest, and so I'm introducing, I guess, Ed Reese to my panel here. And Ed, if you would introduce yourself a little bit, because I don't remember you on any of my sessions before, but I'd be happy to know you.
Thank you. I live in Vancouver. And
Okay.
And I love Dr. Jung's works.
Right. Okay.
Hello, everybody. My video is on now. I read portions of Answer to Job, and it's very stimulating. It's a very stimulating philosophical discussion which directly connects to psychology. It's a big answer to St. Augustine's claim that evil is the deprivation of or absence of good, previsio boni or previsio bonum.
Mm-hmm.
So when good is absent, then evil could be there, but as good appears, evil disappears. My biggest critic of Answer to Job and the whole formulation is this: that if that moral problem was resolved by what Job suffered and how Dr. Jung answered, then all the natural disasters that affect humanity should have come to an end. So neither the crucifixion of...
Idris, run that by me one more time. I want to follow your logic. So sure. You're saying that what are you saying about what would have caused all natural disaster to come to an end?
So Dr. Jung says that there was a challenge thrown at humanity by the evil conspiracy of the devil,
right?
Asking God to challenge Prophet Job whether he would actually still stay faithful to God or not. And Job stood his ground and he stayed faithful. He only
Right.
blamed his luck and the devil and everything else, but never God. So at that stage, Dr. Jung postulates that Yahweh was quite angry. He would release illnesses on people and thunder and storm and earthquakes. And then Job made God very conscious about human suffering. And he explained to God how much he's suffering and all that. And he came out victorious from that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Jung also says that it was Job's episode that actually caused Jesus Christ to be born. And he said that now God wanted to feel a human life on earth and see how it is to suffer like any other human being, and then know humanity's lot or humanity's situation. And in that way, God became very, very conscious. Now, all these words are Dr. Jung's words, not mine, but he said that God became very conscious. And actually, God came under the judgment of human beings. So not human beings, but Job as a representative of human beings. My criticism is this: if all these being true, I just follow Dr. Jung step by step, and I just say, let's assume every single statement is true. Then all the natural disasters had to come to an end. All human sufferings, that God with his almighty power could actually stop it, would have been stopped. Obviously, the humanity creating problem for the rest of humanity might continue, like Cain and Abel or anything else. Bad stock exchange decisions and bad marriage decisions and bad hiring and firing decisions or whatever, building a house in a very
I don't
bad
think
investments.
I don't think that logic is quite right, Idris, because what the point that Dr. Jung is making here is that God is not out there. God is within us. Okay. And so God has nothing, well, maybe God had something to do with our weather today at the time of the Big Bang, but God is not some fantastic puppet master that's guiding us step by step. God is within us, and it's up to us to develop ourselves so that we recognize the divine within us. Okay, this is the fundamental entire turnaround of Jungian psychology. It's why religions, I think to a man, actually hate Carl Jung, because he's calling them out and saying, you guys have been selling God outside. God is somebody who can control the weather on a day-to-day basis, and control you on a day-to-day basis. But that isn't true at all. Each one of you.
His statement is very much like, I have not come here to mourn Caesar. I have not come here to praise Caesar. I've come here to mourn. So he's an attention getter. And right after there, he actually dismantles a lot of religions' foundations. So here I am agreeing with you.
Yeah, okay.
And I what I want to say here is the natural disasters, if Yahweh or God became actually conscious through suffering of at least two human beings, that would be Job and Jesus Christ, then at least the sufferings that God could create and unleash on humanity, he could actually have stopped it.
Right, but
I might agree with the part that we have to become more and more conscious, and there is all his struggle and obviously his investment of his life and efforts, that humanity has to become more and more struggle in what good and what power and what wholeness he has. In a part of answer to Job, he says that if you're whole, then you will be imperfect, but if you're perfect, then you will not be whole. So this is a very, very novice kind of proposal, but I don't think that anyone before Jung would have said it in so clearly. And that comes inside the answer of Job. So I do have great praises for this book. I just want to say that it is quite, it is challenging, even the metaphysical connection of all natural disasters and human suffering, by saying that we should just look at it as from a new perspective, rather than trying to say that there should be no more earthquakes or wives and friends leaving someone or illnesses occurring to
Yeah,
someone.
well, all of that God wrote off at the time of the Big Bang, I think Dr. Jung would say. In other words, he imagines God as having a bunch of dice in his pocket, and he throws the dice out on the floor and says, "Let there be a world." Okay. Well, and so that's what the Big Bang is Yahweh saying, "Let there be a world." And he doesn't interfere with that at all. But Dr. Jung's point is that if you strip away everything, all religions, everything, there's still a mystery. Okay.
Oh, definitely.
And
man is connected to something larger than himself.
Yeah.
For sure.
For sure. And so that's what the mystics were after. And so this whole passage about Yahweh saying, I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. This is early Iron Age men trying to project outward that, this isn't my fault. This is some supreme being's fault that we have a tornado or whatever it is. And here in 70 verses, consecutive verses, Yahweh is laying out all the things he can do. But what Dr. Jung is doing is punching a hole in that balloon and saying, Yahweh doesn't do any of that. And I think I heard a Methodist minister for the first time. I heard an actual theologian speak to this last fall when there was a whole series of tornadoes through eastern Kentucky. And afterwards, his church was destroyed. And some reporters asked the question that they always ask because they don't understand this point, but they always ask, how can God do such things to Kentuckians? And the pastor,
we're closely related to God, he should be kinder to us.
Right, but his point is that God isn't about tornadoes. God is about how we treat one another after the tornado. Okay, that's the point. That is the fundamental point, which, all the fundamentalist ministers get out there and say, oh, Hurricane Sandy was God's punishment on New York for its iniquity. Well, no, it isn't. No, God didn't do anything with Hurricane Sandy. But
both good and bad people suffer. Suffering is not just a monopoly of one group of people here.
Right. So meanwhile, welcome, Jordan.
Good morning, both of you.
Hello.
Good morning, Idris.
How are you? Good morning. I just want to say one thing, and Jordan might laugh at it, but some people say God only knows. But if you put the comma at the wrong place, then it will just start meaning that God only knows. So God is not going to actually move and shake and micromanage the human society. He will just know everything. And you have to deal with his knowledge then at the end, what you have done.
I love that importance of the detail and the subtlety, because, for example, if I say, let's go eat, comma, grandma, that's one thing. But if I take the comma out and say, let's go eat, grandma, let's go eat, grandma, and it's like, well, that's cannibalism. So I agree. And I'll chime in too, that I think there's that both and, that as this story erupts, doesn't just begin, it erupts in the Bible with God, staking the wager with Satan. And in a sense, there's the father-son battle. But there's also that the positive, effective act of free will exists. And there's also the not negative, but interference pattern, free will exists. And so we open just with someone who's inexperienced. They're in total chaos, just like they started first day on the job. It's going to take a year to acclimate to a company culture or similar. And I think that what happens then is when you're thrown into nature, you don't know what an umbrella is. And in that sense, this whole story is that coming into being of how to quell our own internal civil wars and make those not righteous, but make them effective where we can actually drive our lives. And so, like Skip said, it's not that God creates the tornado, so to speak, against us. It's how we come together afterwards, which shows how the tragedy is like the dirt, like the soil that covers the seed, and we crack open. After a disaster, that's an awakening, that's a resurrection. And you always see, in a sense, the best of people. All differences go aside. I mean, I grew up in Tornado Alley in North Texas, and fortunately, I never experienced a direct tornado, only the pressure drops before one that was a little further away. But what I found is after the flood or after the tornado, there were no differences between anyone. I mean, people would say, "Oh, I went fishing today." And people would say, "Well, weren't you supposed to be helping and volunteering?" "Oh, I was in Miss Smith's living room. A trout swam through the living room," because the water was 4 feet deep in the living room. So, the fish out of the river were actually swimming through the house and just reach down and grab a fish. Well, and things like that, to me, I mean, they found the humor within that. And there was death and suffering. But I think that, again, back to the way this story opens up is that civil war. It's not even just the dice that Skip mentioned. Here's the wager, so to speak, which is the mystery of gambling, the I don't know, and the comfortability with the not knowing, but actually operating in the not knowing. And I think
a lot of sociologists.
Go ahead.
Sorry if I. A lot of sociologists say that human beings look at their society and accordingly they project that God would be like this. So in a dictatorial or authoritarian environment, God will be a monarchical kind of God, and in a democratic thing, there will be like a plethora of gods. But Dr. Jung also used the imago Dei word that's come in Holy Bible in a very different way, because in Holy Bible it says human beings are made in the images of God. But then he says, whenever I will discuss God, I'm not going to discuss God. I'm actually just discussing imago Dei. So here is where Skip's correct, bringing it that the self within humanity is actually is a machine or an engine that's moved by God or godly feeling of community and mercy and kindness and charity and justice, taking the side of truth and all that.
Jung really turned the whole idea of religion on its head. He said not that God created man, or God created man in his own image. Man created God in our own image, and that image is within all of us, and we created that God. Now, what the mystery is and what the mystery does, boy, we can't say anything about that. And this is why Job had to put his hand across his mouth, because he couldn't say anything about what God was, but he knew that he still believed that there was a mystery there. Okay, this is the point of Job and why he was treated the way he was, because he knew that he could say nothing about God. Actually, he put his hand across his mouth and really could say nothing about it. Anything that we say about that God could do, who knows that? How do you know that? That's just a projection of some fundamentalist minister that wants to shake you down on television.
Well,
That's exactly
I would
how I feel
agree.
about God, that God is life and our body is just responding in dreams, and we would be in complete silent awe. Like each time the unconscious through the body communicates to us through even a slip while we're walking. And that slip would actually save us from bigger problem, or at that point we are already doing something wrong and it's stopping us from doing something wrong.
Which it
So
does.
the unconscious is all the time controlling human life and other animals' lives. And right there, the awe comes that we don't know what is it up to, but it's really, really an active force. Anyone who's alive will know that life is something very
and I certainly know that now, because that very thing happened to me when I broke my leg. Okay. I was preoccupied with something else. Okay. When I was walking across that parking lot, I was not conscious of myself. I was preoccupied with something else. And my unconscious said, whoop, no, you're going to pay attention to me. Right.
Well, exactly. And I think also, and I guess I often err maybe sometimes too far on, I want to express something in a logos word way directly from the unconscious, except in the manner of not losing the heart of the matter. And I think that religion in that sense was created as a parental metaphor. And in a sense, religion itself can be a metaphor for the development of not only consciousness, but of personal psychology and self-development. Because when you talk about your mom, you're 4 or you're 5, you're in the car and she's a goddess up there driving the car. Right. This is God. And in that sense, so I think that it's created as this patriarchal thing. In some ancient cultures, a matriarchal thing, but it's something outside of oneself, the mom, the dad, the mother, the father. And I think that as we come into Jungian psychology in the 20th century and now as 21st century, there's not so much a metaphor of the parent. There's the rite of passage of the child became the parent of the man or the woman, or the child became the parent of the adult. And I think in that sense, the God is within.
Okay, and so that segues into what I wanted to talk about in this, Jordan, but we're 40 minutes into it. I wanted to start with this, and so the next time you arrive, so we can do it at the beginning of the session, I want to talk about individuation and what the tarot does. We'll talk about it now, but in deference to you, I want to talk about it again at the beginning of one of these sessions so that everybody hears it at the beginning before anybody drops off. Okay.
Right.
And so I do want to respond to one comment on the YouTube channel before we go to that. Coleman Remington says, what if within our human body, which you say God lies, why can't he send a hurricane or an asteroid? Well, there is no he. Okay, we can look back now to the Big Bang, or pretty damn close to it, and we can look down to a Higgs boson, and we don't see any he. Okay. But we know that there is a he in the sense that we have projected he on whatever it is that's happening to us. We human beings have. And theologians have used the mystery of that for millennia to keep their collection plates full so that they could bloviate basically on something that they actually know nothing about. Because the point is, we cannot say anything. This is Job. I put my hand across my mouth. he can't say anything about God, actually. Okay. And he recognizes that point at that time. And so we can't say anything about whether or not, quote unquote, as Coleman says, he can send a hurricane or an asteroid.
Mhm.
Well, how do you know?
Yeah, I don't think he's
how does
ordering up
anybody
the
know?
drive-through. I don't think
Pardon?
God's up there ordering up at the drive-through. And I think when people
No.
say he, it's actually a misnomer, because frankly, the creative agency, the creative wellspring, the unconscious, would be a feminine force, because a male would not give birth. So say Lilith, or the first female, the creative agency, the divine, capital D, would be feminine. And what's interesting, the male would be the moon back then, which is a masculine force. The sun was she who gave life, the life giver. And what's interesting to me there is that in that sense, not God as feminine or masculine, it was God as capital A, all. And the he piece is I'm the author, I'm personifying, I'm most
Right.
likely male in this 300, 400, 500 AD time, even in BC.
Right. And so
Or
that's why
I'm the
they
male who's ghostwriting the female who actually wrote it. I mean,
Right.
it's like they're listening to their wife at home, and then they bring
Right.
this out to
but
bear.
but the point is that God is both and all. Okay,
Mhm.
that's the most important issue. And so the point is that anybody that says God sent a hurricane or a tornado, in every case, that hurricane or tornado kills both good people and bad people. Okay.
Mhm.
And so who elected you to say that God did that? Okay, that's a pure projection of an individual who has an agenda. Okay, that's a theologian with an agenda. He wants to scare people into believing in the church. That's what he's doing.
Also,
Okay.
both life and death don't have value judgment. I mean,
Right.
sickness and health doesn't have value judgment. A person
Exactly.
could be Mother Teresa and enjoy a very bad health, but still she would be very charitable and kind to other human beings. So
Well,
really saying that birth was always good and death with hurricanes or something will be always bad.
Yeah.
And sometimes God might take side of other living beings who would benefit from human death. So sometimes maybe in some geographical area, some other living beings would flourish if human beings were just wiped away. So we don't know about those things either. Like God is not just our God. He's also God of turtles and fishes and eagles.
Right.
Well, I appreciate that you say there's no value judgment, because something I work with in the tarot with my clients a lot is weather and nature knows no emotion. I mean, nature knows no emotion. It only knows weather. Weather is not good or bad, indifferent or different. It's not evil or good. Weather simply washes through. And if I take Skip's really apt metaphor of the unconscious being a dry riverbed and the path of it being, that which washes through. If I look down at the creek or the river, if I'm up in the mountains, and I see all these rocks, if I was a theologian, I could say, oh my God, the rocks are smothered by this water. But the artist in me looks down and goes, oh, look at the pretty watercolor with all the water moving across the top of the rocks. And so what happened there is I just had two perspectives. And going back to the both and, if you mentioned the word Shekinah, Shekhina, to most any theologian, you'll get a blank face. And that's the female Godhead, so it's
okay, but I want to be very careful about justifying a female Godhead, because God is both. God is all.
That's what I mean, is that
right, and
they don't
God,
mention the one, they only mention the other.
And anything that we say about God, we can't. Okay, that's the point. That's the point that Job recognized. I put my hand across my mouth because he realized that he could say nothing about God. We can't talk about Shekinah and the she aspect or the male aspect, because those are just conveniences of language. Okay. In the beginning was the word. Well, okay, we couldn't talk about our projection of God until we had a word. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and
I'm
this,
with you.
Dr. Jung,
when
yeah,
you do
said
this is really important, because that is a visual metaphor of the ineffable, unspeakable, unknowable. And the thing is, though, it's not unknowable, it's not unspeakable, it's not ineffable, but it's everything. It's a capital A, all. And so you could not speak all at one time. That's why the voice of God will kill people in ancient stories, because what happens is the rush of the flood is the whole universe passing through. And that's too much for any one psyche to take.
Okay, I want to respond to one further comment that Coleman has made. He says, I think of it like a machine, which our great man counts. And if our counters are off spectrum, what does that do to our universe? Well, first of all, Coleman, I would say that Dr. Jung's point is that in all pairs of opposites, there is balance and compensation. Okay, and so the universe is always in balance. Okay, the universe is always perfectly in balance. And let's see, saying that it's like a machine is a purely logos way to talk about it, which is what we need to find our way out of. This is what we're going to talk about in our confluence this summer. And Jordan is going to be there with us. I hope Idris will come as well. And Idris caught me this morning by having Ed Reese on his. But anyway, I'm sorry, Idris. You caught me.
Well, no, and it's funny you said
more.
that. He caught you by surprise. I got caught by surprise earlier this week. I was talking about original sin, and I was tearing it down pretty hard.
Yeah.
And making what's the point of waking up guilty, and
yeah.
And someone's, I just texted it to you, and it's an image that texted me, and it was both hilarious, but it also made the point that I was making, except in vastly fewer words. Take a look, and I love it when Idris, when you put Ed Reese or Idris, I'll look down, and sometimes I'll be, oh, someone has Idris's name. It's almost the same, and then I realize it's you. It's like,
it helps the pronunciation. Actually, my name is well pronounced if you actually put it apart. Once you put it together, someone will call me Address and Idris and so many other things.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I get with Jordan, I get called Justin, and I have to say, no, I don't. I'm not a conqueror, or Jason, and I don't have Argonauts. It's like,
right. I'll just, since you're talking about this, I'll just put the image up on the screen here. I think I can do it.
This image takes the guilt right out of original sin and makes it worthless. And original sin as a concept is then worthless. And my argument was, if my lineage, if my ancestors didn't take care of their stuff, it's not my job to take care of their procrastination. Yeah. I can put the pro in procrastination all by myself. And I can need to sidestep the influences from their unfinished things. But this image just knocks it out of the park.
I think original sin is a diminutive, like it's just showing that we actually do much worse things than someone eating from a tree that is not allowed.
Yeah. So this right here, this says the whole story. I mean,
yeah.
Very funny.
Right. Okay.
And that's the thing, is why am I going to take responsibility for my ancestors? It's just like, do not blame a people for the actions of their leader, even.
But yes, we have to still, though, because because we are the culmination of all that's gone before. Okay, we are. And we're the culmination of all that's gone before in our countries as well, and in our societies as well. And so I remember Mad Magazine always had this piece called Spy versus Spy, and it was always creating, the bad spy as the Russian spy. And of course now we have the Russian spy who's there. And maybe what Vladimir Putin needs is a little bit of analysis and consciousness, okay? Because what's the point of killing all these people?
That's the machinistic thinking that we are all just machines, and we are not machines.
And the thing is, the whole world is basically in one constant state of natural recess. And if you want to rule the playground, cool, but we're going to end up going back to school with the consequences afterwards. And that's just, I find it ridiculous to take responsibility for my ancestors. I do not find it ridiculous to learn from what they put upon me in terms of influence and in terms of things I utilize.
Civilization in the form of the law per se does not require us to take responsibility for our ancestors or for our siblings, but somehow these things have to be addressed one way or another. And
yes, and
in
I
order
think
to
what's
maintain
interesting
balance,
is people take responsibility in that context for all the things that were unfinished. If I'm going to take responsibility for someone, I'm basically assuming the helm of their business. And in that sense, if they're a general, I'm now a general. And that's ridiculous because I don't have those credentials. So what's interesting to me is if we're going to take responsibility for ancestors, we get both their positives and their negatives. And the thing is, though, that's where it becomes silly. Because
so
I did not.
We have the consciousness.
We
have
the
consciousness, and we have to reflect on our consciousness and reflect on how we can change things. It doesn't mean that Vladimir Putin isn't insane, because he is. Okay, it means that we have to develop our civilization in such a way that people have more consciousness all the way along. Because exactly what does Putin want? He says he wants to just make the map in such a way that Ukraine is in the boat of Russia, not out of the boat. Okay, that's the only thing he wants. And so somebody can ask, why is it worth murdering all these people and murdering a lot of your own people so that you're happy about the way the map appears, which isn't even reality. The map is not the territory. So, the map is not, you can't find the map on the face of the earth. If you take pictures from satellites, you're not going to find the map. Okay.
Property lines are invisible.
You're not going to be able to see. You're not going to be able to see where Russia is. So what he's talking about is something that's on a printed document, so it justifies him wanting what's on a printed document, that he can do all this stuff. No, civilization isn't going to stand for that. Ultimately, he's going to lose.
Well, and that version of insanity is typically insular. It is insulated from the outside world, because what happens is there's only the both and inside. And which the whole, the dark and the light wolf, and you go to the chieftain and he says, what do you think about the dark and the light wolf? And, well, which one wins? And he said, it depends on which one you feed. So there's the balance of the feeding. And so when he doesn't have the both and, he is insulated from the outside. If you only have the both and inside, you have your own place in the spectrum, but you have to interact with another person's both and balance to see how they weigh in and create a culture. And that's a dance that can push and pull and tug of war. It can also dance like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and be a beautiful thing. I mean, so there's poetry to it, and there's also novelty, but there's also travesty in places where one place beats the other and no one wins.
Right. Okay. I want to talk about Coleman's point here, but I want to talk about it in terms of individuation and the Tarot. And
is it okay if I leave?
Yeah,
I
of
will
course.
watch the replay.
Yeah.
As a last thing, I would say God is everything that interrupts our plans. So that way, Dr. Jung also felt that he has said it in a more eloquent way.
Yeah.
In dreams are very moralistic and religious in nature. It actually guides people. Stop killing others. Even Constantine had a dream and he stopped persecuting Christians in his time.
Yep.
So if we listen to our heart, our dreams, there's much more better future waiting for people, and the meek shall inherit the earth.
Yep.
And humanity
Julius Caesar
do get evaluated by their women, you know. Women are the cheerleaders of the morality. So they actually do define honor and shame. And you cannot just go to your neighbor's house and rape their women and girls and then still think that you're a good man. So those things that are happening and we are experiencing, psychology does one benefit for all of us. That's giving us the agency that we think we are still independent, and we can withdraw all projection. We can still be a observer, a witness observer, without taking side or responsibility for someone else, but being conscious and have an expansive imagination to understand people too.
There's going to be a lot of PTSD in the Russian army after this. And I can promise you that the Russian men that are in this battle will not be able to talk to their wives about how heroic they were in Ukraine. Not at all.
If someone can hurt a child or a female, they cannot call themselves a good man. So that would be my last statement. But have a good day. Thank you for what you're doing.
Okay,
good to see you today.
Thanks, Ed.
Good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Take care, Jordan. Take care. You too. I have to go. I'm very sorry, but I would like to stay. I'll listen to the replay and watch it. Take care, okay?
Right.
You
okay.
too.
All right. So I want to talk about something that Coleman said, but in the context of what Jordan Hoggard, who's my colleague here, does as a profession, so that you can understand it. Because and let me do this preliminary, Jordan, for you, and then I'll do the setup, and then you can talk about it. Coleman says, I wish I had people to talk to. Well, the point is an individuation, and individuation is the essence of Jungian psychology. And the only way you can be individuated is if you recognize your own shadow and can deal with it. Now, what the Tarot does in a very effective way, and actually all forms of divination do, is that they create hooks in the psyche that make you deal with them. And so perhaps it could be said that a lot of people are just afraid of doing a Tarot reading because they're afraid of getting a bad reading. And the answer is that actually is what you should want, because when you get a bad reading, it means you are associating something that's in your unconscious with something the reader has said. And what it's saying to you is, this is a place that you need to reflect and think about and maybe change in your life. It's difficult to do. You know, I have some areas that I still work hard on. But to be completely individuated and therefore whole, it is to understand those places. And what the tarot does is that it triggers thoughts in your mind that that can be quite useful to you because they're about your unconscious, and both positive and negative. But the negative ones are the ones you really have to work on, you really have to think about. And as long as you leave them unconscious, you're not working on them. And so you're not going to get whole without knowing what they are. And so what tarot does is provide associations to you. If your tarot reader says something about mother, then, and that's an archetypal thing in your life, we all have mothers. And if you react to that badly, that means maybe you better work on something with your mother. And if you react to it positively, then, you know, that's a good tarot reading. But I have often said that I could walk into a room with 1,000 people and simply throw the cards out on the stage and do a reading from that without any layout or any special approach, but just simply do a reading, and everyone in the room would think I had done a reading for them. Okay, everyone. And
that's similar to Jung speaking, and the other 3 colleagues come out. He was speaking directly to me. Oh no, he was speaking directly to me. I mean, he was,
well, exactly.
Speaking from the self.
Right, and so everyone will hear a different tarot reading. All 1,000 people will hear a different one. And the guy that comes out of the tarot reading and says, oh, that's BS, that's because he's projecting on it that it's something wooey woo and mystical. Well, it has a certain mystery to it, but it's very clear that what the tarot reader is doing is providing you with associations that stimulate things in your unconscious that make you then reflect upon them. And
arcana literally means mystery. So you have the big mystery, major arcana, and little mysteries, the daily life, minor arcana.
Right. But it's a mystery because nobody knew in the last 600 years, or few people knew in the last 600 years, how that mystery worked. Now we know how it works. It works by association in the psyche. It's a middle ground between a normal conversation over tea or coffee or a beer, and the analyst's clinical chambers, right? The shrink's office, right? Because the shrinks can get to things that are very, very deep. But the point of the tarot is it's a middle ground, which causes you to think about things. But the reader doesn't really know what you're thinking about. So a reader will not necessarily know what you're thinking during the reading, whereas an analyst is going to talk about every little detail all the way down and actually talk about what your association is all the way down to the depth psychology. whereas the reader is simply giving you associations and giving the work to you. But you have to understand that what it is doing is it's showing up the shadow aspects. If you get a bad reading, it's because it's showing up the shadow aspects in your own psyche, and thereby giving you something that now you can consciously think about and work on. Now, Jordan is a professional tarot reader in Taos, New Mexico, and I'm sure he'd be happy to have you visit his table in Taos any day of the week. But he also does readings online, and he's coming to our confluence, so I think there'll be opportunities for him to do readings for people who attend our confluence in Helena in June, and we may be talking about the tarot together during the confluence. So I'm going to shut up now and Jordan, one of the things I'd like you to do is on to the, I'll do it for you while you talk, but your email address is jordan@jordanhoggard.com, right?
It is. And
Okay.
I'll also put this. See if this works. So, yeah, jordan@jordanhoggard.com. And my booking calendar is on Sandbox Psyche, SANDBOXPSYCHE.com. There's a booking tab.
Okay, so Jordan, go ahead and amplify anything that I've said, and then we'll go back to answer to Joe.
Yeah, and that's a great lead-in that you made, because from my perspective, there are no bad readings because there are no bad cards. And what happens then, people think they got a bad reading, or they think they might get a bad reading, because I think there are two camps of assumption that are really peripheral and not really in the heart of the matter of tarot. And those two camps are the Hearts and Flowers and Unicorns Hallmark card version of all love and light, and then the doom and gloom version that, oh my, this person is going to tell me my future. Well, I'm not a fortune teller, because to me, telling someone their future would be clairfraudulence. And
right,
instead of clairaudience or clairvoyance, it's clairfraudulence. I don't know. If I did, I would be sitting here talking to you from the island I bought with the Powerball ticket I won. I mean, that's a bunch of bunk, a bunch of hoopy. And what I find is that in my sessions, I'm not just a talking head reader, and it gets into I love it, frankly, when I have plenty of Jungian analysts who sit down, and in fact, more often than not, they are one, and they don't ping me for practicing psychology. This is doing tarot. But what I find is it works in a very simple way that's very complex in how it comes across. And that's simply images. The original, imago Dei, the divine image, our original language before the words, so to speak. And actually before the words. Images strike chords to resonate or interference pattern with our unconscious or with our imagination. And I think when those interference patterns or those chords are struck to resonate, that rings the bell for the unconscious to well up those psychic contents that nourish us. And not just, I think, in psyche, but in mind and in heart, because they give us our connection back to, like we were talking about ancestors before. If I'm going to mind their problems and I'm going to take care and responsibility of their problems, well, I need to also have the helm of their assets and what they learned. I don't need to start from scratch. And so I find that these images help us all not start from scratch. And there's not you come to the reader and now you have to start all over. This is not a job interview. This is not give me your CV, your curriculum vitae. This is not tell me your stuff. And frankly, I always ask people, would you like to start out with a general reading, or do you have specific topics or areas of interest or questions? And they always pause and they ask, what would you recommend? I said, well, when I read for myself, I make sure I don't have questions anymore. Because for a long time, a decade or so, I felt, oh, there's such a beautiful sanctuary built in a well-crafted question. The problem is, I crafted that question. And so it's going to be chock full of my expectations, all hidden in blind spots, that I think I'm being, quote unquote, brilliant and looking at something deep. I find it's more important to go into the not knowing. Just let the cards play out. And then what happens is then the client can pour in their specifics as we go along, not so much from a gaining trust perspective, but I think from an applicability to their life perspective. What resonates the most? Because often what resonates the most is what they're ready to hear in a way that's ready to be developed, almost like a gardener sees a fruit or a vegetable ripe to pick. And I think then that's how can the session, the reading session, nourish a life moving forward. And I speak the visual language. That's I think that's the kicker in terms of what's different about this, is that I'm basically speaking from art, giving art a voice. And so if someone sees faces in a tree or sees animals in a cloud, that's actually a form of imaginal divination, where you are connecting to make relationships, connecting literally to make connections with capital N nature. And in that regard, it becomes pretty specific. And it often goes along the path of the first 5 to 15 minutes of a reading are me speaking from the cards, and then it becomes interactive. I don't know that it ever goes past 15 minutes, where then you can just feel the wave coming from the other person, either via interference pattern, or this is what resonates, or sometimes even none of that landed at all. And there's a certain numbness there. And that's where you continue, because to me, it's not a right or wrong, or throwing the dice, so to speak. I'm not trying to trick someone into resonance. It's if they don't resonate, then we turn a corner. We play a different tack, and because everyone is different. And I love the quote where someone says, "I want to be different," and the monk says back, "Oh, you want to be different, like everyone else?" I mean, so I think that's what the fun part of a reading is getting to the resonances and the interference patterns. Because I think starting out generally, literally starting out with the images, there are so many clues and cues and so many messages that can come from an image. And sometimes when something completely doesn't resonate, let's say we're 15 minutes into a session and it's flat. And I say, what resonates most with you? Nothing. Okay, take this card. What jumps out at you from the image? I'll start right over, because then what happens is the feel that I went off on the little road trip was wrong. And I don't see anything wrong with that, because I'm reading images. I see what I see. I have my perspective, but it never fails that within 15 minutes a reading is either interactive or I bring it to be interactive, because it's their reading. It's the value of their time. And, my time is valuable, but it's not valuable to pay me for an hour just to talk to you, just to disperse some words. I mean, I'm not going to get paid for once upon a time. Here's your bedtime story at the end, and that to me is where it's not a rote thing. Sometimes I record readings. Sometimes I don't. Most times I don't. Most times I should, because I'll get home and go, wow, what was it that I said? And there are things that I think come from a reading where I think the dance of the reader and the client really play out those visual images into actual language that are useful to take forward. And one thing about my sessions is I always have a follow-up session for 15 to 20 minutes that's included, because it's going to steep, and 2-3 weeks later, wait, what happened? Or this is really running. Let's look at that for a second. So I think really what happens with the tarot is it's that the images speak. It's the images. Simply put, tarot is art. Tarot are archetypal images, both major and smaller archetypes. And I think they strike chords to resonate, to ring the bell for the unconscious, to well up those contents that nourish the psyche. And sometimes, as you said, with a bad reading, quote unquote, it's that they strike chords that are interference patterns. And in that sense, I always find, don't waste trouble. And what the heck does that mean? And I look at ways to lean into the dissonance, to find the treasure living in the trouble. Because in that sense, that's what's affecting them right now. And that's not to shy away from or to have avoidance to. That's the weather in their life. That's the WEATHER weather in their life. And do you need a coat? Do you need an umbrella? Or is it sunny and take a friend kind of thing? So I think in short, that's a little bit of a long, I think, tarot monologue to go into. But that's where I feel that the tarot is where I coined the architecture of well-being, or the kintsugi of self, where a broken vessel, we are all each better for having been broken. And the Japanese art of repairing pottery with gold, silver, or platinum lacquer makes that statement visually. And it's not broken and tossed in the trash. It's broken and put together with golden connections. So I find that that's a bigger piece too of that, where how to look at, you're not broken, you're living, and that means you're influenced. And in a sense, take a look at Peter Pan. Peter Pan's, in a sense, the real enemy. He's the one who goes and kidnaps all the kids. Captain Hook, he's the metaphor for what happens when you leave childhood and go into it. You lose a hand, you lose a foot, you get a scar. You actually get affected by the weather. And I think that's more natural. And he never went after a single kid in that story. So it's interesting to me that back to individuation, tarot to me helps find what weather is going on in your life right now. And in that sense, you can actionably focus on that. And with your imagination, I call it imaginaction, come to things to do about it.
Righto. Okay. So my point is that we will have Jordan with us in Helena. He was actually the first person to sign up for our Confluence. So we look forward to that. Just a minute. I'm looking for something to share with you, but which I thought I had on my screen, but I don't seem to yet. Anyway, I've put Jordan's email address on the chat, and he'd be happy to talk with you and talk about how reflecting through the tarot can be useful to you in your individuation quest, because you can't ignore your unconscious. That's just a non-starter. And to be fully individuated and have a whole life, the only way you can do it is by getting into your unconscious and seeing what it is that it's presenting.
And I will say too, the sandboxpsyche.com has the booking calendar that you can set up. But then the jordanhoggard.com, I think over 500 blogs there writing about Tarot and sometimes just life and things in general. And frankly, sometimes they're just humor. I mean, it's not all dry and serious. And I try to keep the heart of the matter there. So, and there's comments available to utilize there. So if you have any questions or thoughts, very most welcome.
Okay, now I want to do this again, Jordan, but at the beginning of the session so that anybody that looks at the session afterward, and we have literally hundreds of people that do that afterward, they'll see it right at the beginning, because a lot of people don't stick with a session for 45 minutes or an hour, and we're an hour and a half into this session. So
no, and that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in terms of, we were talking about God and what God is and that sort of thing. And this week I have been working on a piece of calligraphy. I haven't done my final version because one of the things I do is practice on a scratch sheet so I can see how it's going to come out on this particular size of piece of paper. But I had selected a quote from Dr. Jung, which is in his book of letters, and it's Letters Volume 2, and it's on page 316 of Letters Volume 2, and it's a letter that Dr. Jung wrote to Elena Kochnig, who I don't really know who is, but anyway.
Page number again? 316?
316 of Letters, 2, Volume 2. Right. And he wrote this letter on June the 30th, 1956. And it really sums up sort of his perspective of what God is and what we have to think about God. And so I'm going to share it with you now and talk to you about how I do this and why I do it in this way. So here's the calligraphy. Now, in this, I've used 4 different colors. Logical things that are rational are in blue. Things that are, and that's thinking in terms of the psychological functions. Blue is thinking. Purple, which doesn't come across as purple, it comes across as black almost, is anything that's intuitive or in the psyche. Green represents sensing, and obviously, and red represents feeling. So blue, so it's sensing is green, intuition is black or purple. Thinking is blue, and thinking is blue, and feeling is red. And part of this process is that I didn't decide correctly what color things should be. So I've made notes to myself when I do it in a more perfect version to change some of the colors and change some of the capitalization and such. But a couple of things about this. So I'll just read it first. Man's relation to God probably has to undergo a certain important change. Instead of propitiating praise to an unpredictable king or the child's prayer to a loving father, the responsible living and fulfilling of the divine within will, of the divine will in us will be our form of worship of and commerce with God. Okay, his goodness means grace and light, and his dark side, the terrible temptation of power. Man has already received so much knowledge that he can destroy his own planet. Let us hope that God's good spirit will guide him in his decisions, because it will depend upon man's decision whether God's creation will continue. Okay, so one of the reasons that I've done this in this way with the different colorations is many people have looked at some of my work as I study Jung's work. I very heavily underline my books. And the reason is because I'm trying to break out individual thoughts that are within his sentences. One of the things I want to point out here is that, a novelist, the advice that novelists get is to use all of the senses in every page to make it very rich feeling. So make sure you're hearing something on the page, that you're seeing something, you're feeling something, you're tasting something on every page. And if you do that, people will like your novels. But I think that there's something even beyond that. I think that that's the green part of what I have put up here. But I think that if you hit all of the psychological functions, you're even going to be more deep than that earlier advice to young novelists. And so that means hitting, yes, the senses, but also hitting the psyche, hitting something rational, and also something that hits the emotion. And if you do that, then you're going to have a very rich novel. And yes, you'll have the sensing things, which are, hear, see, smell, taste, touch, but you'll have so much more. You'll engage the psyche, and this is what Dr. Jung has done. So if you look at this particular passage in the book, I find it almost opaque. It's just letters on the page, and it's very hard to understand what the significance of this statement is. But this statement is absolutely one of the most profound things that Dr. Jung said. Its implications for religion, etc., are enormous. And this is the thinking that we need in our society in order to get to where we need to be. So this is why I separate out each of these phrases so that you can reflect on them, each phrase, and understand what he's saying. So let me.
Well, I'd like to interject, if I could. The
Okay.
beauty of what you're doing here, I think, even goes further. When you see text, you're seeing it. So therefore, it's an image. But what's interesting is it's composed of all these little symbols we call letters that are, you mentioned association before. But what I think is interesting is I find that when we read, a lot of people will read for logic or read for however they're predisposed to feel or live. But what's interesting about this, and I think the most beautiful part, is when you call out the letters and the words by color, you literally make a painting of words. And it's not a scenic writing. I can still read it. But at the same time, you're calling attention to making a painting of the words. So there's a stop and pause, and how do you rest, and how do you transition, and how do you connect from purple to red to blue to green? And what's interesting is I think then there's a visual cadence that I think the imagination understands. And regardless of if someone else would attribute different colors to different words, or they would flip the concepts, that doesn't matter. The eye of the beholder piece, you've basically made a painting utilizing 4 colors and with words. Just by the visual cadence of the color change, it changes the imagination to see the words differently simply because they're in different color. And just even that push, that move can be a catalyst. And so I can imagine in your artistic process too, your development process psychologically too, that there's a lot of heart pouring through this as to which one's which and what's the identity of this word or this phrase or this letter.
Mhm.
But I love the 4 colors for psychological, the 4 operations of the psyche, and the intuition, the feeling, the thinking, and the sensation. But what's interesting is black and white or a gray font, or whether you use Palatino or Helvetica or et cetera, this 4-colored text provides a meditation on the words that I think helps them sink in more intensely, not more fully, but I think more intensely, so that you can find your own more fully through this message. Because I think just with the 4 colors, you've given this wonderful multi-layered voice its characters. And in a sense, this one page is they're 1-act plays. Now you've made a 1-page play out of 4 characters, in one psyche. So I think that's to me, that's pretty cool, because it takes the letters and gives them back their heart, all 4 of them, 4 different kinds.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm working on calling out specific quotes of Dr. Jung, which I think are extremely informative and meaningful to me. And in Helena, you'll have the opportunity to go through the entire portfolio and see what I've done. As I said, this is simply an artist proof. You can see I've still got the lines on it and that sort of stuff. And I decided that on this line, his goodness means, his is obviously in the psyche, but goodness means is obviously a rational function, okay? The word goodness means this. And so then he's talking about what it means. And it's grace and light. Okay, you feel that by emotion. You don't feel that by necessarily physically seeing it. Although that has happened to me, where I felt the grace of and light in the chapel at the Naval Academy. And then his dark side, obviously, we have this tremendous example of this now in the Ukraine war, the terrible temptation of power. And so anyway, obviously, this is a work in progress, but I wanted to give you a sense of what I'm doing and how I'm calling out phrases, because in Dr. Jung's work, you can do this. I'm working with the Red Book primarily. This happens to be a letter. There's a couple of letters that he had passages in that are extremely meaningful, but I'm also doing it with the Red Book because there are, basically every paragraph is an amazingly meaningful passage. So anyway,
Well, and I'd say I think further, I appreciate your practice of lining them out and working out the colors and modifying and going through that process, because to me it's very much like martial arts forms or military maneuvers or football plays or baseball techniques or soccer play. I mean, there's a whole piece there where you can learn the form. That's cool. That's great. But you get out on the field, literally in any of those capacities. Well, and that's when it plays out. I mean, because your weather interacts with the other weather.
And you see it. And
right.
So some of these that I've done, I've redone maybe 5 times. I can think of one in particular that I did it 5 times because I kept wanting to change the layout and show how it's good, how it works. And hello to Mela, nice to see you here. And Tarup is here too with his diamond. Okay, so let's go back and give a little bit more of an answer to Job. I'm going to reread 595 because that's right when Jordan came in, and give you a chance to talk about it too, Jordan.
Give me a chance to catch up.
595. Yeah, we've been talking about God showing all his strengths, right? But strengths from the perspective now of an early Iron Age man, and he's projecting his psyche out on the universe. And so when a tornado comes in, he sees that as an act of God. And although I can accept that it's an act of God, it's an act of God that has a certain meaning in your psyche. It isn't because the weather is a tornado. Right. So all right, so reading on now, paragraph 595. The stage managing of this imaginary duel, the speechifying and the impressive performance given by the prehistoric menagerie could not be sufficiently explained if we tried to reduce them to the purely negative factor of Yahweh's fear of becoming conscious and of the relativization which this entails. The conflict becomes acute for Yahweh as a result of a new factor, which is, however, not hidden from omniscience, though in this case, the existing knowledge is not accompanied by any conclusion. The new factor is something that has never occurred before in history of the world, the unheard of fact that without knowing it or wanting it, a mortal man is raised by his moral behavior above the stars in heaven, from which position of advantage he can behold the back of Yahweh and the abysmal world of the shards. Now, I'll just, while Jordan gives us a little response to that, I want to bring up the image that appears in William Blake's series of images on Job to show you what is meant by the shards and the back of God. So
definitely, and my commentary will open out with the first line of the paragraph 594. Here, Job is challenged as though he himself were a god, except he's put on the playing field, so to speak, with no knowledge that he's been challenged as a god. He's just simply being challenged, and he's being challenged out of left field. You know, he's surprised. Has all this loss, regardless of his preparation, and you know, the abysmal world of shards. It's interesting. There, I'll be curious to see the image you bring up of William Blake, but there's that idea of as we are born, a little piece of golden divinity sticks in us. It's, you know, we each get a little piece that's broken off of the gold of the divinity, and that's a shard. We'll see here the hidden place is the allusion to an idea found in later Kabbalistic philosophy down in the footnote. Is also called shells. And what's interesting is that would be even ancestral, because shells were once the house. I mean, you and I both each have a house in our background. Well, they're not alive. There are things that are shells but they're shells that you can crawl into, just like a crustacean or an ocean creature or a snail, and live within. So I think the concept of shards also opens up into the concept of to dwell. But that dwell is living. And that goes back to Job being challenged as if he is himself a god. He's not challenged from oh, you're a puny human. We'll give you some things that won't kill you. He's gonna learn and he's gonna live. So it's, he wins or he learns, because there is no losing. And so long as he's alive, if he died throughout. But I think when the conflict acute for Yahweh as a result of a new factor, not hidden from his omniscience, he has to become the bugbear in a sense. In that sense, that's Job self-challenging, if I put the God within.
Okay, let me give you this image now. So what is meant here by the world of shards is that everything that we are now and everything that exists now is based on the breakage of everything that went before. And so things get recycled on the earth, whether we recycle them or not. And so in this image, what's happening is Yahweh, here's Job underneath Yahweh, next to Yahweh's arm, and he's looking down, and Yahweh is showing him Leviathan and Behemoth. Now, these are huge creatures. Behemoth would possibly be a hippopotamus or an elephant, and Leviathan is in actual fact a whale, and these obviously were both known in Job's time, the existence of them. And God is pointing out that maybe these things are false starts. Okay, and he could say the same thing about the dinosaurs, I suppose, if the dinosaurs were more well known in Blake's time. And my wife is kibitzing here and saying you could say the same thing about humans. Obviously,
nice.
We have a lot of false starts.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie.
That's some good levity.
I have to end this at 11 o'clock Eastern time, 10 minutes from now. So, Debbie, please let me finish my thought.
Would you tell Debbie thank you? Because that was just brilliant.
Okay. Jordan says, thank you, Debbie. That was just brilliant. Okay. So here God is pointing out that he had a lot of false starts. Okay. And he's pointing out the same thing that Jung said about the herds below Mount Elgon, that it wasn't a very aware consciousness that created these creatures in several 100 million years, as opposed to magically abracadabra. Okay, they exist only because there have been many mistakes in all forms of evolution coming along, and this is where we are now.
So God could put the pro in procrastinator.
Yeah, and so obviously even Behemoth and Leviathan look different today than what people would have thought of them even in 1825 when Blake did these pieces. And so
and that reminds me of the Far Side.
God is showing his shards and how he made lots of mistakes creating the earth. But that's only if you're projecting God in this way, which is what Blake is saying, that if you project God as as a he that's outside of yourself, this is what God would look like, pointing out all his mistakes. Go ahead, Jordan.
Well, I was going to say it's a little bit kind of aligned with going with Debbie's joke, but the mistakes then us and the creatures also made mistakes. It reminds me, I think it was in Gary Larson's Far Side, where you see this big ship out towards the horizon, and it's Noah's Ark, and there are two dinosaurs on the beach, and one says, "Oh shit, that was today."
Right.
And then the unicorns are right behind him, and they go, "Yup."
Right. Okay. So we've had some fun today, and hopefully some interesting chat as well. So anyway, I haven't always gotten your website onto the what goes underneath these videos because of busy doing other things, Jordan, but from time to time we will talk about your business of reading, and I think that's quite reasonable, but I want to do it earlier in the session next time.
Yeah, and I had a call in the middle of the night from you know the time zone thing. So Australia is 16 hours in the future. So I get a call, and it's one of those, okay, got to take this call. But that kind of upsets the balance when it's, at 2:45 to 4 here, and I'm like, oh, go take a nap. And it's like, I should have just stayed up. So
yeah, well, maybe that's sometimes what I do. I have a lot of that, as you know. So
you have to be careful about interacting with the whole world, because it can be a wonderful schedule disruptor, because I do love naps, but I don't want the daylight hours to be a cacophony of intermittent naps. I'd still like to get some stuff done.
Yeah, I get to the point during the day where I just say, I've got to take a nap. Because the business that I'm a principal in is headquartered in Malaysia, which is exactly 12 hours off.
Yeah, it's totally
where I am. So if it's 11 o'clock in the morning here, it's 11 at night there. And the result is that I work at all hours and attend all hands company meetings at like 2 a.m. sometimes.
Right.
Right. Okay. So peace. I hope some of our followers will come and meet us in Helena come June. I've left the links for that. And remember, the reason to come to a event like this is not so much to see the presentations, which the presentations in themselves are going to be quite interesting because they are going to be experiential. And so it isn't so much that as the interaction of the people, not only the organizers, but also people like Jordan Hoggard and many others. Even Debbie will be present, and she is a realized master of the Buddhist tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition. She completed the 3-year retreat in Tibetan Buddhism, which is the Buddhist answer to divinity school. So it's a non-trivial feat to complete that as a Westerner. And so she is filled with wisdom, and she's going to interact with what we'll be saying at the confluence. So it's going to be, I would say, explosive.
Well, definitely. I think the word I'm looking forward to is the experiential. Everyone in the swimming in this pool, and the presentations certainly, but I think just the being there part. I feel like we're going to be in the middle of the ocean with plenty of moorings and also cast about,
Yeah.
I mean, in such
there is-
wonderful ways.
There's going to be a huge amount of numinosity and
Yeah.
synchronicity there. Huge. And so I have to sign off now because it's time for the Buddhist half to get going in the same room. So
Yes,
I'll
I
say
respect
goodbye
that.
for today. And see you tomorrow. on
Okay.
the Monday night show.